Hi there and welcome. I'm going to be trying to do a ton of stuff in this video. I'm sorry if it goes a little bit longer than some of the other ones. I'm going to try to go through it as fast as I can. If I go too fast for you, make sure you go back, pause it, rewind, watch it again, watch it as many times as you need to really ensure that you understand it. If that being said, if this is stuff that you already know and you feel confident in it, or maybe you've heard me teach this in another class, go ahead and skip forward to the parts that you really need help with. I've given you a few handouts and I've given you a couple poems, and I'm going to be referring to them over the course of the video. Again, pause the video, pick up whatever poem I reference. It'll help you a lot in terms of understanding the content. The main poem we're going to be looking at is called My Papa's Waltz. It's a poem by Theodore Rothke, and we're going to be asking what is implied in this poem. And not just what is implied, but how does the form of the poem, how it's made, relate to the content of the poem, what it's about. I suggested in class that form is content, that form isn't just something we add to it, it doesn't even just slightly change it. Form is content, that how a poem is written is what it means. Using Theodore Rothke's My Papa's Waltz, we're going to try to go through 4 or 5 different pieces of form. There's many. You need to know this. There's probably hundreds of different ways that we could look at how a poem is actually constructed. I'm going to look at some of the most popular ones, and I'm going to suggest how Rothke uses form to connect to his content. In the context of that, I've titled this How Form is Content in Poetry, My Papa's Waltz being our example. I want us to remember this the whole way through, why we always ask why. It's incredibly important for us to recognize that when it comes to form, we can always ask, why did the poet use a simile? Or why did the poet use this form of rhyme? Or why this speaker? And if we kind of compare, well, what if he had used a different speaker? What does this one do that is different than another? What does this rhyme do that is not done with a different form of rhyme? How is the sound of this word changing the meaning, how is the sound of this word different from the sound of a different one? We're going to take them. We're going to take them in order here. I'm going to pop up a different board for rhythm and walk through that a little bit more in detail, because I think we often have a hard time with it. I'm going to give you the option to skip ahead if the handout was enough for you. I'm going to read the poem first, so go ahead, pull it out. My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Rothke. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. We've said that in terms of analyzing a poem, we first want to look at the direct, then we want to look at the indirect. It doesn't make any sense for us to say what is being suggested here, what is being implied, if we have no idea what's actually being said literally or directly. So first we see this story. There's obviously a child, perhaps a son, and he seems small. We'll get into that later when we talk about speaker audience. He seems like a young kid. And he suggests that the whiskey on his dad's breath is enough that it could make him dizzy. That just feeling and smelling his breath, there's so much alcohol on it that he himself, the little boy, feels dizzy. He then says, I hung on like death, such waltzing was not easy. He's holding on so tight, and it's not an easy waltz. It's not, he's probably being moved around quickly, and he goes on to say, we romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. There's pans flying all over the kitchen. My mother's countenance could not unfrown himself. Mom's got a frown on, whether that's because she's unhappy or whether that's because she's joking. Oh, come on, guys. She can't get this frown off of her face. The hand that held my wrist, right? We see this picture of a hand holding a wrist, was battered on one knuckle, right? So we've got a battered knuckle holding the wrist. And at every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. We see this picture of a small child, ear right at the waistline of the father. Father holding the wrist, right ear scraping a buckle if they miss steps. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, right? So we see a father who's kind of tapping out the time to the waltz on the head, and his palm is full of dirt, or it's dirty. Then waltz me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. And so the boy is then brought to bed, still holding tight to his father. That's what we see directly. Now the question is, what is being suggested here beneath the surface? Because we've been discussing in class how often what is beneath the surface, if it is missed, we miss often what is most important. To get at the implication here, I want to start looking through a bunch of the ways that this poem was constructed. We could look at so many. We could say, why is it in 4 different stanzas? We could say, why is it about a boy and a father, and we will. We're going to look at rhyme. Why do certain words rhyme with other words? Why are they in the order that they are? We'll look at rhythm, and we'll look at why are there certain words that sound a specific way? And why did the poet choose to use a specific poetic device? We're going to start with rhyme. Now, really quickly, a rhyming word is a word that has the same ending sound as another. So if I said top and I said stop, those 2 words rhyme because they both end with op. Pop and top both rhyme because they both end with op. The beginnings are different though, so they're different words, but they rhyme. In this poem, we're going to see that the rhyming scheme goes A, B, A, B. In order to make a rhyming scheme, we always start by calling the first line of the poem, in this case, the whiskey on your breath. We always call the first line of the poem A. We call the second line B if it doesn't rhyme with the first line. If it does rhyme with the first line, for instance, had it read, the whiskey on your breath, but I hung on like death, we would have called it AA because both of those both of those lines end with rhyming words. When we come to a word that rhymes with a previous word at the end of a line, we give it the same letter. So, the whiskey on your breath is A. Could make a small boy dizzy becomes B because dizzy doesn't rhyme with breath. But I hung on like death is A because death rhymes with breath. And then such waltzing was not easy, dizzy and easy are so close to rhyming that we're going to allow that to also be B. But we're going to come back to that in a second. If you look into the second stanza, we have pans and countenance, and then we have shelf and self. That's going to read CD, CD, because pans is a new rhyme, but it's going to rhyme with the third line. And shelf is a new rhyme, and it's going to rhyme with self. Moving to the third stanza, wrist rhymes with mist, knuckle rhymes with buckle, and so that will read EF, EF. And finally, the last stanza is GH, GH. So we see that the rhyming scheme of this can be qualified as an AB rhyme. It's 4 stanzas, each with 4 lines in an AB structure. If you need help with that, go ahead and ask me later in class. So that's rhyme. That's what rhyme is. Now I want to add one. Definition to that. If a rhyme is like pop and stop, we also need to know that off rhyme is when 2 words sound similar but don't rhyme. In this case, we see that in the first stanza, easy and dizzy, they sound similar. They almost sound like they rhyme, but they don't. Dizzy does not rhyme with easy. Remember, when it comes to form and content, we always ask why. We've got this story, this poem about a papa's waltz, about a boy who's waltzing with his papa through the kitchen and then off to bed. Why in a poem like this, we should be asking, would we have 2 words that don't really rhyme, that almost rhyme, but that don't? I think for us, this is going to be our first clue as to what the implication of this poem is, or what an implication of this poem is. Um, we we may have heard the short little poem, "Roses are red, violets are blue, honey is sweet, and so are you." Uh, it's meant to be this little childish love poem from one to another, and it's beautiful because it has this little rhyme, right? Roses are red, violets are blue, honey is sweet, and so are you. Because blue rhymes with you, there seems to be this sense of continuity and structure to the poem, and because it ends on that rhyming you, it has a feeling of completeness. Now, that's not to say that it's always comical or that it's always beautiful in the sense that it's something sweet. I think of Lord of the Rings in the line that Tolkien writes, "One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them." And because find them rhymes with bind them, there's this sense of completeness, and yet it's in this epic, dark sort of way. In either case, it seems like rhyme kind of brings things together, or it gives something a sense of wholeness, that it can be understood. Off rhyme, I think, and definitely in this case, seems to suggest that something is not complete, or perhaps something is wrong. Let me read this again. "The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy." And we're waiting for a word that rhymes with dizzy so that we can feel like the quatrain or the stanza is complete, but we never get it. That word that rhymes with dizzy never shows up. In fact, we get a word that sounds almost like dizzy, but doesn't. And I think there's part of us that kind of cringes a little bit. What's wrong with this, we should ask. And I think Rothke is saying, feel that. There is something that's not quite right here. I don't think he wants you at the beginning of his poem to have that sense of roses are red, violets are blue, honey is sweet, and so are you. He doesn't want that kind of finality there. Something is slightly off.